Welcome to Cypress Valley Bible Church Online. I'm so glad you chose to connect with us again, and it could be that you're watching this on Sunday, June 7th, which also happens to be the date that we are reopening our Sunday morning services with a number of ground rules, including no kids' church or student life or adult groups. Now, we're fully aware that you may not be comfortable attending in person, and we understand that, and it's very important to us that we continue to minister to you in any way that we can. So we are offering these messages on Sunday morning so that you can still stay in the habit of watching on Sunday morning. So you need to know I'm recording this on Friday afternoon, so it's available to you on Sunday morning. The very same message that I'll be delivering in person on Sunday morning, June 7th. I want to also mention how grateful I am and we are that you continue to give faithfully to the ministry of Cypress Valley Bible Church. I continually thank God for the way His people are seeing the need to give to keep the church moving forward, and we've been able to lower our budget because while we're not meeting, our expenses are less. Now that we're meeting, our expenses will rise, and someday when we have children and youth ministry again, our expenses will be back to what they were before the coronavirus crisis that we're in. So again, thank you for your gifts that make the ministry here possible, and continue to pray for God's provision for our church. Now today we're beginning a new series. The title of the series is Daniel. It's a series about God's prophet, Daniel. Now, this series will last for 4 weeks in the month of June. And I want you to notice the logo has Daniel in the famous lion's den. And that will be the topic of the fourth and final message in our series in June. But I want to mention this morning, the very fact that he's in a lion's den tells you that Daniel lived in a pretty messed up world because somebody put him there, wanted him to die at the hands of those lions, and it wasn't a good situation. And that's why I think we can all relate to Daniel, not that you'll ever be put in a lion's den. But the reason that we can relate to Daniel is that he lived in a messed up world just like we do. And Daniel trusted God to get him through it, just like we can. Daniel was a man that trusted God from the time he was a boy. And that's when we're first introduced to Daniel, is when he was a boy. Here's an artist's sketch of Daniel. He was a young teenager at the time we meet him. And that's why I say we can all relate to Daniel. Children and adults can relate to Daniel. One reason that I picked this series right now is because with our reopening and no kids' church, I knew and prayed that there would be a number of children that would be with us in our Sunday morning services. And I chose something that I thought that all of us, including the children, could relate to. When we first meet Daniel, we see that his life was impacted by the man I want to show you next. His name is Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, king of the most powerful empire in the world in the days in which Daniel lived. Let me show you where Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar lived on this map. Daniel lived in Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar lived in Babylon. Jerusalem is in the land of Israel. And the God of Israel is the same God that you and I believe in. But the Babylonians didn't believe in the one true God, the God of Israel, the God that you and I believe in. They had other gods. Now, these gods weren't real, but they made them up, and they thought they were real. Their names were Nebo and Bel and Aku. Strange sounding names for those gods, but the Babylonians believed that they were real. Now, I want to tell you another thing, that Jerusalem is 500 miles from Babylon. And back in those days, there were no planes or trains or automobiles. People had to walk or ride camels or donkeys to get where they wanted to go. How did Daniel ever connect with Nebuchadnezzar and Nebuchadnezzar with Daniel? What happened to bring them together? Well, we're told at the very beginning of the book of Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and conquered it. So let's see that on our map. You see that Nebuchadnezzar, probably he himself didn't go, but he sent his armies to Jerusalem to conquer the city of Jerusalem and the land of Israel. And when he did that, he ordered his troops to bring back to Babylon. Let's see the arrow going the other way. Going back to Babylon, there were a number of the Jewish people who were taken captive, kidnapped, and brought back to Babylon. And among them were these 4 young men, Daniel and his 3 friends. Hey, can you imagine how these 4 boys must have felt? My guess is they were very sad. I mean, they got pulled away from their homes and pulled away from their mother and father. And I imagine they were scared. What are the Babylonians going to do to us? Are they going to make us slaves? Are they going to put us in prison? What's going to happen to us? But it wasn't long after they arrived that a man came to tell them what the king had planned for these 4 young men. This man's name was Ashpenaz. Here's a picture of Ashpenaz. He's in the white robe and he's talking to Daniel and his 4 friends, or 3 friends, the 4 boys. And we need to ask an obvious question. Well, his name is Ashpenaz, but who is he and what is he saying to the 4 boys? And that's what we read about next. King Nebuchadnezzar instructed Ashpenaz, the master of the king's servants. So right there we learn who Ashpenaz is. He is the master, the leader of the king's servants. You can imagine the king of the most powerful empire in the world had lots of servants. And you know, to be a servant of the king was one of the best jobs you could ever find in that day. Everybody wished that they could be the king's servants and live where king's servants lived and have clothes like king's servants have and eat food like king's servants have. And Ashpenaz was the leader of them all, so he was a very important person. And he came to Daniel and his 3 friends, and he tells them what the king had sent him to do. Because when the king instructed Ashpenaz, he said, "Bring some of the children of Israel, young men, good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand." So when Ashpenaz came to these 4 young men, he said, "The king has sent me to find young men like you. And you young men are the best that I've found. You're good-looking. You're gifted in all wisdom. We can see that. You possess knowledge and you're quick to understand. We have singled you out for a very important mission, a very important job. And here's what it is. Who had the ability to serve in the king's palace. We believe that you have the ability to serve in the king's palace, to be some of his closest servants, to serve him in a very important way. And he's not through. He says, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Babylonians. You 4 young men here in Babylon now, you need to learn to speak our language. You need to learn about our ways and our culture. And so we're going to teach you from our books, our literature, of what it means to be a Babylonian and what Babylon is and how great it is to live among the Babylonians. And that's not all. He goes on to say that the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's choice food and of the wine which he drank. Ashpenaz said to the 4 young men, "You're going to get the best food you've ever had in your life. It's the best food you can find in the world. It's the king's food, and you're going to get to eat the same food that the king eats. You guys are special. And he's not through. He goes on to say, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time, they might be servants of the king. We're going to give you the best training in all the world. We're going to train you for the best jobs in all the world. You're going to have the best education, the best food, the best of everything. That's what we offer to you. 3 full years at Babylon University, a full scholarship for the best training, for the best jobs. Well, look at the picture and think about Daniel listening to Ashpenaz. He's heard from Ashpenaz about all these great things that are being offered to them. The best education, the best jobs, the best food. How do you think Daniel felt at that time? What was he thinking? What was he feeling as he listened to Ashpenaz? Well, we're not told right away. We're told later, but not yet. Because first, Daniel wants us to know more about his name and who the names of his 3 friends are. So that's what Daniel tells us next. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, these young men, as I showed you earlier, were from Jerusalem, the land of Israel. They had Israel names, Hebrew names, and each of their names had a special meaning. So I want to share with you the meanings of their names. It's very important. Follow me as I share this with you. The name Daniel means God is my judge. The name Hananiah means God is my giver. The name Mishael means God is my strength. And the name Azariah means God is my helper. I want you to notice 2 of these names end in E-L. Daniel, E-L, Mishael, E-L. Now, E-L is short for one of the names of God, the one true God, and one of his names is Elohim. So when you see El, it's short for Elohim. So really Daniel's name, if we were going to use the Hebrew meaning of the name, is Elohim is my judge. And Mishael, his name really is Elohim is my strength. Now I want you to notice the other 2 names end in A-H. Hananiah, Azariah, and that's short for another name for God, which is Jehovah. So really, Hananiah's name means Jehovah is my giver, and Azariah's name means Jehovah is my helper. These are really special names because they are all named after God. And these are really special parents, really special mother and father that would give boys names like these. Can't you just imagine as each one of these boys were growing up that mom and dad were continually reminding them of the meaning of their name? Now, Daniel, don't you forget, Daniel, God is your judge. And Hananiah, don't you forget that God is your giver. And Mishael, don't you forget that God is your strength. And Azariah, don't you ever forget that God is your helper. These are the names that were given to these young men. Very important names when you think about what happened to them. As they were taken away from their home in Israel, in Jerusalem, and taken to another land with other gods, that they had their names to carry with them. And I just wonder, if when Daniel was being taken away from his home by the Babylonians, if his mother wasn't calling out to him, Daniel, I love you. Don't ever forget that I love you. I will miss you. I will pray for you. And Daniel, don't ever forget. God is your judge, Daniel. Don't ever forget. God is your judge. Now, I don't know if she cried out to him in that way when he was taken or not. But I'm sure that his mother and his father instilled that in him as a young man. God is my judge. Now, having thought about these names of these boys and what they mean, I want to go back to Ashpenaz as he's speaking to them. And when he learns what their names are, do you think Ashpenaz was excited about their names? Of course not. In fact, Ashpenaz didn't like their names at all, and that's why we're told next that to them Ashpenaz gave names. And he gave names to them because he was saying to them, you boys don't live in Israel anymore. Those Hebrew names won't do. You need Babylonian names. You need Babylonian names after the gods of the Babylonians. And so he gave them names that went along with their gods, Bel, Aku, and Nebo. And here are the names that Ashpenaz gave to the boys. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar. He gave Hananiah the name Shadrach. He gave Mishael the name Meshach. And he gave Azariah the name Abednego. Now, these names had meanings just like the Hebrew names. The Babylonian names had meanings too. Let me share the meanings with you. Belteshazzar means Bel, protect my life. Shadrach means command of Aku. Meshach means who is like Aku. And Abednego means servant of Nebo. Now, those names are very different than the Hebrew names because these are names after different gods. Notice, Bel, Aku, Nebo. As if these names were going to change these boys. As if these names were going to make them think that they had new gods and that these gods were the answer to their lives. It won't happen. We know that because now Daniel has two names. Let me put up his names again. Daniel, God is my judge. His Babylonian name is Belteshazzar. Bel, protect my life. Which name do you think was Daniel's favorite? I don't even have to guess at that. He couldn't keep the Babylonians from calling him Belteshazzar, but in his heart he knew that his name was Daniel, and he never forgot it as long as he lived. He lived even when he was an 80-year-old man, still referring to himself as Daniel. He never let that name go. And he never stopped thanking his mother, I'm sure. Thanking God for a mother and father who gave him that name. Because you see, his name means God is my judge. What do you think that meant to Daniel? That's important that we think about that. What did it mean to Daniel to be continually reminded by his name? God is my judge. Well, let me give you some background on that in the life of Daniel. We know for sure that as a prophet of God, Daniel believed in Jesus for everlasting life. Now, Jesus hadn't come yet, but Daniel knew he was coming. Daniel knew through the prophets that Jesus was going to come someday, and that people, even before Jesus came, needed to believe in Jesus who was coming to give them everlasting life. And Daniel did believe in Jesus for everlasting life. Let me show you. This finger represents Daniel, and this hand represents Jesus. Daniel believed in Jesus to give him everlasting life. And the moment he believed, Jesus took Daniel and gave him life that he could never lose. He had Daniel in his hand and he would never let him go. And Daniel knew for sure that someday he would live with Jesus. When Jesus comes back to this earth to reign as king, Daniel would be with him in his kingdom. He also knew that one day he would stand before Jesus and be judged by Jesus to determine how he had lived his life, to determine what his role would be in the future kingdom and how close he would be to Jesus in that future kingdom. Daniel knew that God was his judge, that God will be his judge. And Daniel, more than anything, wanted for Jesus someday, when he stands before Jesus, to say to him, "Well done, Daniel. You were a good and faithful servant. Great is your reward. You will be close to me in my kingdom." That's why Daniel, no doubt, continually reminded himself, God is my judge. God is my judge. I need to ask the question, what does God think? What does God want me to do? Because God is my judge. And when we go back to the picture of Ashpenaz standing before Daniel and his three friends, and Ashpenaz is telling him about all these great things that the Babylonians offer him. We're going to give you Babylonian names. We're going to give you the best education in the world. We're going to give you the best jobs. We're going to give you the best food. You are so privileged. What do you think Daniel was thinking as he listened to Ashpenaz? Do you think he was thinking, all right, this is great? No. What he was thinking was, God is my judge. What does God think? What does God want me to do? And I know for sure, we can know for sure that that's what Daniel was thinking because of what we read next. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food, nor with the wine which he drank. Daniel was thinking, I can't control if they call me Belteshazzar. If other people want to call me that, I can't control that. And they want me to get this education and learn the language. Okay, no big deal. They want me to study the literature. No big deal. I can learn about the ways of the Babylonians. Doesn't mean I have to believe what they believe. But when it comes to eating the king's food, I can't do that because I would defile myself. I would make myself unclean because I know that much of the king's food was offered to these other gods. And because I know that, I can't eat food that was dedicated to Bel or Aku or Nebo. I can't do that because God is my judge. And because I've asked, what does God think? And what does God want me to do? And so Daniel purposed in his heart, I can't do that. And so what does he do next? We're told that he requested of Ashpenaz that he might not defile himself. Now going back to the picture, Daniel now is saying to Ashpenaz, I'll go by the name. I'm not going to fight you on that. You can call me Belteshazzar, and I'll study. I'll work hard to learn the language and study the literature. But when it comes to the food, I can't go for that because I would defile myself in the eyes of God, and God is my judge. Uh-oh, what's going to happen now? What's Ashpenaz going to do? Is he going to get upset? Is he going to say, well, Daniel, off to jail for you. You're disobeying the directive of the king. Is that what's going to happen to Daniel? Do you want to know what's going to happen to Daniel next? I'll tell you. Next week. Don't miss. Next week. But the important thing today is what we learn from Daniel about how to trust God while living in a messed up world. What's the secret to trusting God while we live in a messed up world? Today we've learned that the secret is found in the meaning of Daniel's name. Daniel's name means God is my judge. And to live in a messed up world more than anything else, we need to lay hold of that truth and take it to heart and bring it to mind over and over again. God is my judge. So what does God think? What does God want me to do? Because God is my judge. What an important lesson, critical lesson for children. And if you're a child, I'm speaking to you now, please listen to me. I know that you already probably have run into friends or other kids that do bad things and they say bad things. And you're thinking, well, I want friends. I want them to like me. I guess I need to do what they do. I guess I need to do the bad things and say the bad things that they say. Don't think like that. Be like Daniel. And remember, God is my judge. What does God think? What does God want me to do? And I want to speak to you if you're a parent. Do you know what children need today as much as anything else in this world? They need parents like Daniel's parents. Parents that are continually reminding them, God is your judge. When you go to school or you spend the night at a friend's house, I'm not going to be with you, but God is. I don't know everything that you do when you're not with me, but God does. And you need to remember, son, daughter, that God is your judge. And you need to ask, what does God think? What does God want me to do? And no matter who we are or what our age is, we never will outgrow the need to remember the truth of the meaning of Daniel's name. God is my judge. Because in this messed up world in which we live, we are continually pulled and tugged to do the wrong thing, to do the bad thing, to say the wrong thing, to say the bad thing. And it's in those times that we're tempted that we need to remember, God is my judge. What does God think? What does God want me to do? Today we've learned the secret to trusting God in a messed up world. And the secret is found in the meaning of Daniel's name. God is my judge. Don't miss next week. We got to find out what happens to Daniel next and learn more of what God wants us to learn about him and how to trust him in this messed up world in which we live. Well, let me lead us in prayer. Thank you, Father, for this opening lesson at the beginning of this great book, Daniel. And thank you for those parents that gave him that name and for the lesson that that brings to all of us, no matter what our age, child, teenager, adult, parents. Father, help us to remember this truth, that you are our judge, that we might continually ask, what do you think? What do you want me to do? Knowing that one day we'll stand before you and give an account. For the way that you will answer that prayer by bringing this truth to mind, we'll give you praise and we'll give you thanks. Amen. Well, I sure look forward to connecting with you again next week.